All right, this is a Pro Wrestling Illustrated podcast. I'm your host, PWI senior writer, Al Castle, with my co-host, as always, Brian Solomon. What's happening, Brian?
Not much. Happy to be here, as always, Al.
Are you a Super Bowl guy?
If I get invited to a party, I go. I'm one of those guys. We're a baseball and wrestling household. So
yeah, same here. Some basketball has come in there with my kid getting into basketball. So we've decided in the last few months that we're Nets fans, which has been a difficult time to be a Nets fan over just the last couple of weeks. But the Super Bowl always overlaps with my nephew's birthday party, so we all get together and a good time. A fair amount of wrestling representation.
Yeah, I mean, I watched it. I enjoyed the game. I don't watch a lot of football, but it was a really good game. As an outsider who rarely watches, it definitely feels incredibly overproduced these days. But
yeah,
what are you going to do? The Undertaker was in one of the commercials with Kevin Hart, right?
Yep. I didn't see it, but I'm told Tyrus was in a commercial with the NWA Championship.
He was. They had a commercial for Gutfeld, the Fox News show that he's on every night, and he's sitting there with the belt. So it was crazy. Plus, of course, WWE's usual commercial, which I have to say, it's fallen pretty far from that classic 1999 one that kind of started the ball rolling.
Yeah, it was a few seconds in before I even realized. I was like, was that Michael Cole's voice in the background? And then I think all we saw was Charlotte. And this like sparked a conversation with a friend of mine who was there, who was a wrestling person, that it clearly, like, WWE loves putting Charlotte out there. And this is a conversation we've had, but I feel like Charlotte's a bigger deal to the non-fans than to the fans, right? Because
possibly, yeah.
Because I mean, like, Charlotte, really? That's who you're going to showcase? I mean, you would have thought it would have been, I don't know, Roman or even Becky or Cody or Bianca Belair. I mean, I just don't put Charlotte all the way at the top. But I guess the lineage, that she's Ric Flair's daughter, it's a good story,
Yeah, although if you're not really a big fan, you're not even going to know that from watching that commercial. So it's kind of weird.
Yeah. Anyhow, we got plenty of to talk about in our own sport or pseudo sport. It is the Pro Wrestling Illustrated Achievement Awards issue, the year in wrestling, out now in print and digital. So in a moment, we are going to go through all the awards, give our thoughts. These are chosen by you, the readers. So you can't get mad at us at this one. And also, suffice to say, a whole lot going on since we last got together with the Royal Rumble. WrestleMania is kind of coming into view. We have a better idea of what the main event of WrestleMania is, although I'd say it's still not 100% clear, and a fair amount of debate about that and what should be the WrestleMania main event. So we'll talk a bit about that. But as I mentioned, the Pro Wrestling Illustrated April issue, The Year in Wrestling, available now at PWI-online.com. This is one of the big tentpole issues, I think, outside of the 500 and the other big ranking issues we do. Certainly, before I was working for the magazine and as a kid and a fan, this was one that you couldn't miss, right? The Year in Wrestling, all the awards. And again, as voted on by you, a great looking issue, not just the awards, but a recap of the year, lots of photos that you haven't seen before, the top 10 stories of the year, title change history, and so much more. I think we've got do you have the unofficial official awards that people always get a kick out of? Did we get those in this year? I think we did.
Yeah, we did.
Yep. And then memories from the staff. So an excellent issue. You don't want to miss it. PWI-online.com if you want to have it delivered right to your home. Go ahead and subscribe. Don't miss an issue. Thankfully, I've seen some of these on the newsstands. So hopefully you could find them too. Let's jump into it. Don't want to spend the whole show doing it, but I do think we should go through the awards winner. By now, a lot of you folks know this, so I don't think we're revealing anything as much as giving our thoughts on it. Let's start with Rookie of the Year, and with 53% of the vote, Brian, this year's Rookie of the Year is Hook. And I got to say, I don't know, surprised, but I thought this was going to Logan Paul. And Logan Paul came in first runner-up with 20%. To me, the best celebrity crossover wrestler ever. And at this point, I'm not even sure we call him that, because he seems pretty committed to this, and it looks like he's going to be wrestling Seth Rollins at WrestleMania. And I'll say now, I think that they may steal the whole weekend. I think that might be the best match of the whole weekend. Logan Paul and Seth Rollins, and that's how much confidence I've got in Logan after whatever it is, 3 or 4 matches. So that said, Hook certainly kept the more full schedule, more of a regular wrestler on AEW, and at his height was really, really over. I think, he suffered the same fate of a lot of other AEW wrestlers in that there's just so many people that they have a hard time keeping the focus and the momentum on anyone, and they just kind of lose their way. And I think that is the case with Hook, who I feel from that high that we saw in the spring and the summer, where every time he'd come out, the crowd would go absolutely nuts. I think he's fallen a couple of rungs. But what did you think about Hook's rookie year? And I think our rules are 2 years in the business. We might have changed that, but either way, he qualified and he won.
Yeah, I think it's under 2 years. Of course, the problem is with wrestling is in a lot of cases you don't really get to really see someone's work until they've been in the business for at least a year. So, I mean, a true rookie in wrestling is tough. But Hook actually was. I mean, we did get to see him from the very beginning. I'm with you. Logan Paul would have gotten my vote. And actually, when I voted in the Observer Awards, Logan Paul did get my vote. But Hook, I think part of the reason is with some of these celebrity wrestlers that come in, I think a lot of fans just don't automatically think of them as quote unquote rookies. It's like they're in a different category when it's a celebrity guest wrestler who, comes in now and then. Whereas like Hook is on the regular roster. He's on the website. We see him on TV. And I think that's like a subconscious thing that goes on. We think of those guys or Braun Breaker or somebody like that. We think of them more as so-called rookies. I think he got off to a great start. I also think, the second half of the year, he really hasn't been on TV all that much. They kind of sort of gave up on that huge push that he was getting. So, he started strong. I don't think he finished strong. But, it's the Rookie of the Year award is always a weird award because you're required to predict the future,
Yeah.
But based on what they actually did, Logan Paul to me would have been an easy choice. Even the way he's presented on the card, he's already, one of the biggest stars on any show that they put him on. That's a whole different category to me. So, but people have spoken.
Yep. And the other runners up, Paige Van Zandt at second runner up. That one's really puzzling to me.
Bizarre.
Did she wrestle more than once? Even I don't
unless
know.
those are a lot of her OnlyFans subscribers that
yeah. I think the little we saw of her, she was really good. More in just a presentation and the mic work and the character work than necessarily in the ring, where she was fine, but we didn't see that much of her. And Tony D'Angelo, I like him as a big pick in this mix. He was part of that reboot in NXT where people really soured on it, where it was more gimmick heavy. But he's come a long way, I think, from early on. So I think that's fair. Let's go. Most improved the rest of the year. Maybe this might be a place I would have expected to see Tony D'Angelo more. It goes to Mandy Rose at 33%. First runner up, Madcap Moss, Julia Hart at second runner up, and 2.0 at third runner up. I'm now knowing what we know about Mandy and how it turned out. This one is a little bit sort of like that's kind of too bad. I don't want to overstate it as a tragedy, but she was really good. Mandy Rose had a lot going for her, and it's too bad. And I think the part of it that is especially too bad is I don't know that we see her back. Or I in part because she's making so much money somewhere else that in a weird way, sort of like how you lose wrestlers John Cena, The Rock to Hollywood, where they could see, I can make how much money doing what. It's the same thing for her. What is the incentive for her? And it's not like she was on the main roster, making millions wrestling in front of 60, 70,000 fans and stadium shows. She was working NXT every week, essentially demoted from where she was a year earlier when she was on the main roster. But she got a lot better. Again, I don't see the incentive for her coming back.
Well, she really found herself in NXT, and I think that's how she earned this award. She really got lost in the shuffle on the main roster, I think, to a certain degree. And they reinvented her in NXT. That's why sometimes this most improved award it doesn't always mean, I think some fans get confused or misled. It doesn't always mean just most improved in the ring. It could mean a lot of things. Most improved presentation, most improved from a push point of view, from success, titles and all this kind of thing. And she came a huge way. She was an example to me of an NXT success story in the way that somebody who didn't really seem to be doing much on the main roster can just be reinvented and do something. It's a shame what happened with her from a fan perspective, but it still, shouldn't take away that she deserved this award. Because, I heard some people saying like, well, I'm sure they wish they never gave her that one now in hindsight. And I'm like, no, it has nothing to do with that. So she's gone. Whether she's gone or not, she still was deservedly most improved wrestler of 2022. And that stands regardless of how it ended or if she ever wrestles again.
Yeah, I don't have a huge problem when I see the runners up. I mean, I think it was a fair choice. And again, I hope, look, if she's done with wrestling, that's fine. If it's what's best for her. But, I think people forget that she came out of Tough Enough, and maybe the last and one of the most successful wrestlers to come out of Tough Enough. I remember that year, she was kind of cast as the heel, and it was the other one. What was her name? She since passed away. Who won Tough Enough that year? Wasn't it? It was like I don't want to give the wrong name, but anyway, sadly, but. She's had a hell of a career. It came out of that system. It does show that maybe she did have a real passion for it. Maybe for her, in a roundabout way, her looks could have worked for her detriment because she was so attractive. And I think maybe people didn't take her seriously that much with what she brought to the table in the ring. Because she did seem kind of cut from that mold of the early 2000s WWE, where she could have fit in like, a lingerie match or something like that. And then I guess, her side hustle, only reinforced that. But she had a lot going for her, and I hope we haven't seen the last of her. Comeback of the year, I got to say, I didn't get this one at all, both the winner and really all the runners up. The winner went to Taya Valkyrie, who I think is a hell of a talent. I think great to see her back in Impact. Clearly she's better off there than she was in NXT, where she was doing nothing. But really, I mean, and part of it was that I think there were some really good candidates this year, and none of them even came in the runners up. So first runner up, Bayley, who I don't know, I want to say underwhelming, but I don't know that she's set the world on fire since she came back in August. Johnny Gargano, who flopping might be overstating it, but again, another guy who I think has underperformed since coming back, and Alexa Bliss, and they could say the same for her. None of these people, I think, have had very successful comebacks, and this was the year of Cody Rhodes. I mean, I don't know how Cody didn't run away with this.
Well, the tricky thing, no, you're right, and I mean, it's nothing against somebody like Taya Valkyrie, but when you see somebody at that level in the business win an award like this, a lot of times it says to me that there weren't a lot of big comebacks that year. Yeah. But here's the thing with Cody. I think some people may have hesitated just because of what happened with him. It was like it started out as being maybe the comeback of the year, and then he got derailed for half the year. So I mean, like that would have given me pause in voting for Cody. Like, in fact, and I was very consciously aware of that in voting for him in an award like that, just because of what went down. I think on paper it should have been the comeback of the year. But again, so then it became tough of like, well, who do we vote for? Like it just might have been a weaker year in that category.
But this was also the year of Bray Wyatt, and
you really want to vote for that?
I know, but I mean, to me, he when I look at these runners up, he's at least in the mix. I mean, right. I think his comeback meant more than any of these others, even if it ultimately kind of disappointed and flopped. It was some of this, I think, is also like the interpretation of comeback of the year. I mean, is it you can interpret it, and I think this would go for Cody and for Bray, kind of separating how well they ended up doing from the actual moment of coming back. They
Right.
were both really, for Cody, to me, it was one of the biggest ever. The WrestleMania stage, the reaction he got, it was huge. Bray, again, the guy who was underwhelmed, I think, since coming back, but the build to that was really something else. And when he finally showed up at the end of that show, it was a big deal. And I think that's my real issue, is that none of these people felt like a big deal when they came back. Bailey, maybe the most of them. I mean, at SummerSlam with Becky and this new faction, but to me that might have been good enough for like a third runner up. Next up, inspirational wrestler of the year. I could quibble with this, but I don't have a huge problem with all of it. 32%, with 32%, John Moxley takes the award. First runner-up, Liv Morgan, then Joe Doring and Josh Alexander. I think all these people are inspirational in their own ways. Obviously, Moxley, when you think that early in the year he was in rehab for his alcohol issues, to come back and to me really have been the MVP of AEW and the kind of saving grace for in what was otherwise a pretty difficult year for them. I think it's great. I think the way he handled it was great. That there was he had no shame about it. He acknowledged that he had an issue. He looked to take care of that issue. Came back and addressed it and used it as fuel to have one of the best years of his career and really lead his company, really be the leader where there was that absence of leader, especially after the whole CM Punk fiasco. So yeah, I think he's a fine choice.
Yeah, he really stepped up, and it can't be overstated how beloved he is by AEW fans. I mean, they love him. They worship the ground he walks on. He could do no wrong. I mean, we certainly heard that and saw that when we gave Wrestler of the Year, or rather PWI 500's number one spot to Roman Reigns. We heard that loud and clear. But so that was kind of an easy one. And also, you can't forget the fact of coming back from the personal struggles that he had with addiction and alcoholism and that kind of thing. I mean, that adds to, I think, him being an inspirational figure. That and he was the workhorse, like you said. He came in the post-Punk situation. He really stepped up in a way that he probably wouldn't have been called to do if Punk had stuck around. And he did what he had to do, and he did it well.
Yeah. I like Liv Morgan being up here. I think she was one of the cooler stories in WWE over the last year, and one instance of really making a star. I mean, you think about Liv early in the year, and maybe fallen a couple of places since then, but at the Rumble, a great performance. So cool for her. Joe Doring had cancer issues. He came back from that. Josh Alexander, I think, has been a terrific Impact champion. Glad to see him on this list. Again, a place where maybe I would have expected Cody, just because sort of everything Cody does is inspirational. That's sort of his gimmick, is being inspirational. And I guess he got some votes, but not enough to earn a runner-up spot.
Well, maybe he'll get 2023.
Yeah. We'll see how the next few weeks go. We'll have that conversation in a moment.
Yep.
Most popular wrestler of the year. You just touched on it. I mean, I think it's part of the same conversation. John Moxley at 32%. Roman Reigns. This is fascinating because Roman won most hated wrestler of the year a few years ago as a babyface, and here he's first runner-up for most popular as a heel. And then CM Punk was at 11 and Bianca Belair at 8. Again, not to overkill the Cody thing, but I think certainly if he hadn't gotten hurt, he'd be in this mix, right? And maybe could have won it because he was such a hot act. But in the apps, and I bring him up because I think it's so difficult to make baby. I don't know if it needs to be that difficult to be a babyface and market a babyface in 2022 or 2023. But Moxley absolutely. I think he embodies the modern babyface and the best of it, where he's not kissing babies or anything like that, slapping hands with fans. So he has that cool edge. He almost has like that heel edge, kind of like the Steve Austin thing, right? The anti-hero thing, but with a modern twist on it. And so it's easy. And I think this is a challenge that Cody has had over the years. And I worry that he'll have again if they do go all the way with him. And we saw it in AEW, is that he's so kind of traditional in that babyface role that inevitably some fans are going to reject you. It's like you're too kind of saccharine, right? And Moxley's never had an issue with that. And I think he really has a character that's almost bulletproof to that, because it is the cool rebel. I mean, he comes into Wild Thing, how much cooler can you be?
Well, we've seen that they could reject just about anybody if given the chance. I do think there's been a big shift in my opinion. I'm not talking about AEW so much as the WWE fan base. And I think maybe it's because AEW stole a lot of WWE fans, but that element of the fan base that tries to hijack the show or reject people that are getting pushes and things like the Batistas and the Roman Reigns, that kind of thing, or Cena. I feel like that has become less and less in recent years. Like they really seem to be much more of a, I don't know what the word is, like a docile fan base. Like they will take what you give them. And again, I think it's because the more critical, smarter, quote unquote, fans may have migrated to a certain degree to AEW. Like the people who were rejecting Batista and cheering on Daniel Bryan like 7 years ago, or whatever it was. I think like the majority of those people, or a lot of them, are strictly watching AEW right now. I really, really do, because you don't see it as much. I think if they were still around, unfortunately, and I love Cody, and so I'm glad this is not happening, but if that fan base was still around, they already would have been crapping on him, in my opinion. They already would have been rejecting him, and we haven't seen a whiff of that yet. And I think part of it is that he comes across so very genuine. You really get the sense that even in a world of illusion and worked shoots and all that, that this really is part of who he is as a person. Yeah. I believe that myself. I mean, I've spoken to him personally, and it comes across, and I think people get that and they feel it and they like it. It's also a huge change of pace. You don't get characters like this anymore in wrestling. You know what I mean? Like, what you get is like the ironic version, which is what Kurt Angle was, right? The ironic version of that. But he's like the genuine article. I think it's pretty cool.
And it was already kind of put to the test at the Royal Rumble, where there was certainly a contingent that thought if Sami doesn't appear in the Rumble and win, and Cody does, he's going to get that Batista treatment from Rumble 2014, and he didn't. Fans were just happy to see him win. So Zayn's another guy who maybe it's a timing thing. I mean, you'd think he would have done really well in this voting, but late in the year, he was still very kind of firmly entrenched as a heel in the bloodline, and it really was just the closing weeks of the year that he really, really came into his own as one of the more popular figures. Again, I think if you did voting again today, I think maybe Sami Zayn runs away with this. But he did at time, and we'll see by the end of the year how that works out. He was a vote getter. I mean, there's 31% of votes that went to others, and he's the first mentioned in that group, so I'm sure he did okay. Most hated wrestler of the year, no surprise here, MJF with 49% of the vote. Interestingly, Reigns is also the first runner-up for hated of the year, and I just think that's so fascinating.
Make up your mind.
The 5% goes to 7% goes to Jericho, and Sammy Guevara rounds it out with 5%. Not a lot to say to here. I mean, this is MJF's thing. I mean, he's clearly like hell bent on being the heel of his generation, one of the greatest heels of all time. I gotta say, I don't know how well it always works. It feels a little put on sometimes. There's definitely was a thought that late last year when he won the title and they were sort of teasing this babyface run, that maybe that was the time to go in with it. And he used that as an opportunity to kind of double down and be doubly despicable. And, he's a world champion and he's doing well. I guess, I don't know that AEW is they're also competing with WrestleMania, WWE at its hottest in years. So it's going to be an uphill climb for them. But I don't know. I had to interview MJF some months back, and he's a hoot, right? I mean, he's like a super fun character, but it is always put on, always. Right. And part of me respects and appreciates that because he is dedicated and committed to it like nobody else. But also, I don't know. I think it get a little bit old sometimes.
Well, I wrote a column about him a few issues ago, and he reached out to me, and he was in character when he reached out to me, which, I sort of
You'd say it's no character, but I mean, come on.
I know, but he's not though. I know,
Yeah.
I know from enough people that he's not, and I kind of know sold it a little bit, but I mean, that's how I think he's in a different place now than he was even when he first came into AEW. I think it's almost like he's at an Andy Kaufman level of commitment these days. I really do think that. But here's the problem with this might be hurting him a little bit, and it's not just an MJF problem. I would never be somebody to advocate for AEW doing monthly pay-per-views like WWE does. I don't think that would be good for them. But here's the problem. Now you're seeing this with MJF and Danielson. It's a great idea for a feud. There's built-in heat there. There's a reason for the feud, but it feels like it's dragging on forever. And you're thinking, okay, they're going to wrestle at Revolution. And this has been going on for weeks and weeks and weeks. And in WWE, it would have been like, oh, later this month. But so the problem is this. Back when WWE was doing only, say, 4 pay-per-views a year, the way that AEW does, they had this whole thriving house show market. So they would build up their angles and storylines on TV that would be paid off on the whole house show circuit for 2 or 3 months until you get to the pay-per-view, which made everything make sense. It made everything lucrative. But AEW, at least up until like right now, AEW never did house shows. So like it just feels with these long-term angles that when you're waiting like 2 months for the guys to wrestle on pay-per-view, like it just starts to tread water and it's going nowhere because they're not taking it on the road for house shows. The pay-per-view is months away. And so they just have to figure out ways each week to kind of keep it going somehow. And I think it hurts a lot of guys at the top. MJF is just one of them.
Yeah, agreed. MJF comes up again in Feud of the Year, which went to MJF and CM Punk. I'm fine with that. I mean, frankly, I don't think it was a great year for feuds. The Sami Zayn Bloodline stuff, I guess, isn't a feud. I mean, if there was a category for storyline of the year, it would have run away with it, but that really wasn't a feud. So first runner-up is Blackpool Combat Club and Jericho Appreciation Society. Second runner-up, Roman and Brock Lesnar. And third runner-up, Becky Lynch and Bianca Belair. I don't really think of any of those as these incredible, historic feuds. I'm not sure what I would have put in here. I mean, Seth and Cody are in the other vote getters, and they had feud, if you take a different interpretation and not so much, the bloodlust of two people wanting to kill each other, but just a series of terrific matches. They had 3 great matches on pay-per-view that you could argue got, better with each one, and then the big crescendo in Hell in a Cell. So I think that would have made sense. The other one I'm surprised not to see here was, for the same reasons, because of the series of matches, was the Briscoes and FTR, who had, I don't know if all 3 were last year. I think they might have been. No, maybe I think they
were all in 2022. I think part of what hurt that is they were not able to really build it up properly on television. So you can't have much.
The last one would have been, I think, too late to be part of the voting. Yeah,
and you can't have much of a feud when you can't even have one half of the feud on television.
Right.
So like it had to sort of be this. It was just strictly 3 matches. I mean, really, that's what it was. So maybe that's why it lost out. I think CM Punk and MJF, even though it was very early in the year, and for people,
I think that what hurts it is that with everything that went on with both these guys by the middle of the year, you almost forget that this was that much of an issue early in the year.
Right, but I still do think it's worthy because I mean that feud was so hot at the beginning of the year, and it could have been so much more. It probably would have dominated the whole year if what had happened hadn't happened. I still think it deserved it. I still think it was the hottest, most memorable feud of the year, even if it was a while ago at this point. I think also this maybe speaks to the possibility of maybe this award should be couched more like feud / angle of the year. Mm-hmm. If we wanted to go that route, it's a little less kayfabe than usual. But I mean, then because your easy pick then is the Bloodline, which is the most memorable angle, storyline, whatever you want to call it, for sure, of 2022.
Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe it's a conversation to have with Kevin. Kevin did create another award a couple years ago, Independent Wrestler of the Year, and this year it goes to Matt Cardona. He ran away with it with 42% of the vote. I got to say, I mean, just this one's going to be a tough one to judge, because I think by the nature of the award, a lot of the best candidates here are not going to be on everybody's radar. So Cardona's kind of gimmick was that he was like dominating the independent scene. So not surprising to see him run away with it. But also you could argue that it's kind of not really the spirit of the award, right? Because Cardona is, I mean, he was a major league wrestler, WWE wrestler, who's taken that act now on the road. I mean, you can argue that it's almost like what the Honky Tonk Man did for years, and he might be still doing for all I know. Wrestling at your local high school or whatever, and taking the cachet of having worked in
the Metal Maniac.
And I'm not comparing, in terms of what they bring to the table. I think Cardona's a real talent. Just headlined the NWA title match over the pay-per-view over the weekend. But I also, and maybe I'm wrong here, but I don't think of 2022 as like his big year, right? I mean, I thought that would have been the year before that where he and even maybe 2020, where he really he started collecting all the belts and all the companies. So I don't know if I have a huge thought on this one.
Well, a couple of things with him. First of all, I think he's the definition of the kind of person that should win an award like this. I mean, he's somebody who has raised his value on the independent circuit. He's making a living doing this, devoid of being tied down to any major company. He's kind of working the system to his benefit. He's all over the place in terms of where he's working. I mean, that's the definition of it. And as far as like him being in that mold of like ex WWE guy, milking it on the indies, I think he's totally reinvented himself. I think it's been so long at this point that I honestly think that I'd even go so far as to say that there's probably a bunch of fans of a certain age going to see him at these shows that aren't even that totally familiar with him being Zack Ryder in the first place at this point. So, I mean, like, I don't think I'd hold that against him. I do not think he's coasting on that the way we, used to see like the Honky Tonks and the Jimmy Snukas and the Doinks of the world just kind of live on the indies for eternity. This is a different kind of a phenomenon.
He's been gathering up some old trademarks, right? I mean, that hasn't that been the story?
Yeah. Doesn't he own that? I think he owns the Zack Ryder name, or he was fighting for it, or whatever. I don't know what leg he has to stand on legally with that. It seems weird to me, but I mean, well, I guess you could. The claim is that if they don't use it or do anything with it, that it can lapse. So maybe that's what it is.
Do you see him as a guy that Triple H would be interested in bringing in? I don't know that it works as well back in WWE.
I don't know if it works as well either, but I still do see him as somebody that they might want to bring back. I don't see, it's weird because, like when Cody comes back, it's different because people have really been seeing him on national television every week, whereas Cardona, for as successful as he's been, is a much more of an underground kind of figure for underground fans. And I don't know how much of the WWE fan base overlaps with that. But I mean, even bringing him back as Zack Ryder, I do think they could do some things with him. I don't think he's going to be a main event guy or anything like that, though. He's not going to be like a Cody coming back. Yeah. And if that's what he's looking for, then he might not want to come back. But I mean, I think that he could come back and have a better run than he had before, or at least just as good.
Yeah. Speaking of Cody Rhodes, he wins match of the year with Seth Rollins. Their June 5th match, Hell in a Cell. I got no problem with this one. And just go through the runners up. Gunther and Sheamus from Clash at the Castle, first runner up, a terrific match. Roman Reigns and Brock Lesnar from SummerSlam, and the Briscoes and FTR at third place, or third runner up, I should say. Cody and Seth, I think this is the right choice. Reminds me a little of and bear with me here, of the other really famous Hell in a Cell match was Undertaker and Mankind, in that it may be less about everything that happened in the match and more about kind of the lasting image in your mind. I mean, I think the what you remember about this match was Cody's shoulder, right? And him taking off that robe and it being all purple. And, we talked about it. He was already a super hot act coming back at WrestleMania. And with this, he almost transcended into like immortal. This was like the night that he became a wrestling legend. And that said, different from Undertaker and Mankind, which I don't think was a good match at all. This was a really good match, and they had a really good match with Cody working with one arm, and if anything, it made it a better match because so much of what was compelling about it was actually watching this guy struggle through this injury and tough it out. It sort of reminds me, and we might have talked about this after it happened, of Ric Flair and Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 24, where it was the imperfections of that match that I thought made it better because you were watching something real. You were watching a close to 60-year-old Ric Flair try to hang in there and not quite be able to do it, and the bumps didn't look quite right. But in those imperfections, that what told the story. And it's the same thing. It was Cody favoring that arm and not being able to throw every punch with everything behind it that made it that much kind of gripping, that much more gripping. And I agree. Interesting that they had a great match at WrestleMania in front of 70,000 fans and that huge stage. And really the one that you'd remember was on I didn't remember what the pay-per-view was. What the hell? I guess it was the Cell pay-per-view. Yeah. But I mean, otherwise kind of an off month forgettable pay-per-view. And it had the match of the year.
Yeah, because it had the emotion behind it. So like I may have voted for, well, I don't think it would be in the running because it was late, but the dog collar match with the Briscoes and FTR. Right. To me, like if I had a vote, I probably would have voted for that if it was available, but judging a match just as a match, divorced from anything else. But again, it was the emotion of Cody's match. It was the moment. It was so much more than just the actual match. But like you said, on top of it, it also happened to be a really good match that both guys pulled off really well and told a great story. Because sometimes you're going to make an argument like a match is a moment. It's got a lot of emotion in it, but it's not that great of a match other than that. And this was not the case. So, I mean, like this is the match that from that point of view is the most memorable match to me of 2022 for sure. And like I said, even at the time, the second I saw him open up that robe, I said to myself, this guy is made for life. I just knew it. I said, we're going to be seeing that image for years and years to come. And I just knew it. Like, this is the smartest thing. He's a cagey guy. And I knew why. He must have been like, there is nothing on earth that is stopping me. And I know he said that from going out and doing this match, in part because he knew exactly that if he went ahead and did it, that would cement him in the minds of fans and make sure that they would never forget him. And I think he was right.
Yeah, absolutely. And a shout out to Seth Rollins, who sometimes gets kind of lost in these conversations, but more than held up his side and maybe, you could argue, especially working on the guy as hurt as Cody, had to do more than his share. And not just this match, but when we've already talked about Cody so much and what a great year he had, and Seth played such an important role in that from the outset, and he's now transitioned into this role where he's on his back a lot, but he's so good. I mean, I think Seth Rollins is sort of like low key doing some of the best work of his career and best work in the world, and he's so effective in that role that you're going to lose a lot. I know it's something that we deal with and dealt with when put together the 500, because it is kind of the kayfabe list. And so we're going over win-loss records. And I mean, Seth went months without winning a match, right. But along the way, just having all these great performances. So this is all to say, I hope something's in it for him down the line. And I very much think, if Cody is the heir apparent, and if he wins the title and then you got to figure out what you do with him, you got to think this is one of the biggest matches that WWE can put on, is going back to that feud.
You can revisit it on another level, now that he'd be on another level. And also the fact of knowing that Seth has already been there, so it's not like he's just coming out of nowhere. I also think Gunther is a made challenger, built-in contender for sure. And that probably was the intention. So, because you have to have, champion's only good, especially a babyface champ, but also a heel too, is only as good as the people they have lined up to wrestle him.
Yeah, and I also think, and I'd be fine with this, that if Cody, and we're maybe getting ahead of ourselves, but if that title does go around Cody's waist come WrestleMania, we're not going to see another, whatever it is, 3-year title reign. I do think Cody is the kind of character that he could lose it and then win it back, and we might see a few different reigns. So I do think a program with Seth could and maybe should include Seth winning the title at some point, whether it's SummerSlam or somewhere else, or even a Gunther. So and Cody on the chase. So that's definitely somewhere they could go. Faction of the Year, again, a relatively new award, goes to the Bloodline. They run away with it with 48% of the vote. Yeah, easy peasy. Blackpool Combat Club first runner-up with 17%. Jericho Appreciation Society with 10%, and the Bullet Club with 6%. Yeah, I mean, not a lot to say here. Again, we said that there wasn't a storyline of the year, but if there was, it would have gone to this. Maybe in lieu of a storyline of the year, this is kind of like the honorary storyline of the year, because it recognizes that week in, week out, it was the most entertaining thing to watch on TV was the Bloodline.
Yeah, without question. And I know people like to joke about this and laugh, but it's very telling to me how, we can talk all we want about the new Triple H regime and Paul Levesque as chief content officer, but it's not lost on me that I'm not saying that the product hasn't improved since he's been in charge, because it has, but the most compelling thing on the show week after week reportedly is the thing that he's least hands-on about. It's the thing that Heyman really seems to be the guy, and Roman Reigns to a certain degree, but I can't imagine it's got to be, Heyman is the one with the experience. It seems like Heyman is the guy who's orchestrating a lot of that. And now I've also heard too with the Cody stuff that it's been a lot of Heyman and Cody directly. So it seemed, but again, maybe that is part of the whole brilliance of Triple H in charge and the leadership style, which Vince never had, all due respect, of knowing when you do step back and you do say,
yeah, absolutely,
these guys know what they're doing. I don't want to screw this up. This is gold. To know when to let them do their thing. And he seems to be doing that, where it's like, it almost seems like the main event stuff is in its own different separate universe, which I think it should be. I think strong main event programs can and should carry the show. And I think that's something that got lost post Attitude Era and watered down a lot of the product. But strong main event programs absolutely should carry the show.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I do think that's a mark of a good leader, is delegating responsibility, and in this case, maybe to Heyman. And I think Triple H sees, first of all, I don't know that it ever should have been the role of Vince or anybody else. I mean, Vince, because it's his company, I understand him being that hands-on, but this is why you surround yourself with creative people, is so they can do that. And I think too often Vince's involvement in these storylines just kind of muddied things up, because clearly whoever was the creative vision behind something had this vision, and then Vince, I think, would be like, well, that's fine, but what if we do this a little different? And it sort of feels like, when and this really applies to my day job more than this job, but you write something, and an editor comes in and looks to make a change to it while preserving the rest of it, and that change doesn't work, right? That change changes everything. So you can't, if
all
we're
been
going to
there.
do that, then we got to change the whole thing. We can't just change this one thing, and that was sort of Vince's touch so often with this stuff. It's like, all right, you could do this, but what if we do this one thing differently? It's like, well, if you do that one thing differently, the whole thing is different.
Right. Yeah. And part of it is knowing which battles to fight and when to go with the flow. But like we've all had that experiences, and with someone like Vince, so many people that probably knew that it was better without his involvement. What are you going to do? You can't, you can't tell him that. Your sort of hands are tied. And so I think that's actually one of the pluses of having somebody like Levesque, Triple H as in charge of the creative, is he knows when to not overproduce and over micromanage. I think that's part of what he's doing intentionally.
Yeah. Tag team of the year goes to FTR. I know when we were putting together the tag team list, there was a lot of debate about who is the best tag team in the world, and there were arguments to be made between the Usos and the FTR. And when we settled on the Usos, I remember part of the conversation was, well, the fans are probably going to pick FDR, and so they'll.
Yep, there you go.
And maybe the us picking the Usos number one maybe drove more fans towards FTR, kind of trying to right the ship. But again, 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. They're both fantastic teams. The Usos come in first runner up at 29%. Then the Motor City Machine. I'm sorry. Then the Acclaimed and Motor City Machine Guns. But really, to me, and you tell from the numbers, it was a 2-horse race. I don't know. You know what? Again, and maybe some of my own biases here. I would have given it to the Usos.
Me too.
FTR had a great. Any other year, FTR would have had one of the best years in tag team history, but they happened to do it in a year where another team also had that year.
Yeah, and look, like I've said, like we had this whole debate with the 500. The Usos were a main event level team. They were a main event draw. They were that kind of a team. Like, and again, I'm not like saying they're as good as these other teams, but like a Road Warriors or like a Steiner Brothers, where your team, they're more than just a tag team in the tag team division trying to win the tag team titles. Like they transcend that. They're in main event pictures. They're in main event feuds. Like that's where the Usos were at. FTR was never that. Like we said before, FTR is an incredible team and probably the best performing tag team in the business, the tag team whose matches I most enjoy watching, but they just weren't presented in that way. They were sabotaged by booking. And not only that, but I was dazzled as much as everyone else was by all the titles they were collecting. But then you break it down and you look at it, and they were hardly wrestling. They were hardly defending these titles. They were, and if that counts for anything, then you have to look at that. Yeah, they were the AAA champs. They were the IWGP champs, Ring of Honor. They were hardly ever defending those belts. They'd go months and months without even, they were just carrying them around. Whereas the Usos were on house shows. They were on every pay-per-view. They were defending on Raw and SmackDown. And yes, we know it's a work, whatever. We know they didn't win those matches, but they were out there doing the work and facing challengers, getting their, showing the fans, yes, we can't be beat. We're the champs and we deserve to stay the champs. That's something that FTR was just not doing. Not their fault. They weren't being allowed to do it in some cases, but that's why Usos, to me, would have got my vote. But I understand why people voted for FTR. Completely understand it. They just wouldn't have, Yeah.
And beyond the defenses and what they did in the ring, I mean, as you touched on, they really were the big act in WWE. I mean, in lieu of Roman Reigns, being around, because this was the year that he pulled back a lot in terms of his schedule, they really were the face of the Bloodline week in and week out, and were the stars of the show, and did an admirable job. Not jumping too much ahead, because this might come up later, but I got to say, all this discussion and focus on Sami and Roman and where it goes, and this being the payoff to this amazing storyline. I think maybe down the line there's an even bigger payoff, and it's Jey Uso, right? I mean, and that really goes back to the very, very beginning of the, before there was a Bloodline, there was Jey and Roman a couple of years ago when Roman just started this character. And throughout all of this, and everybody has played their role so well. But to me, Jey Uso has been the MVP from the very beginning. And I think his character and his storyline is sort of the most compelling of all of it. And when you think of where does this eventually go? I mean, is it an Uso versus Uso feud? You got to think that you see that at some point. And the payoff beyond that, you got to think, is Jey standing up to his cousin, to Roman, going full circle. This was the storyline that started all of it, and maybe at some point Jey Uso winning the world title. And I'm not saying he's ready for that yet, right now, but I absolutely think that we could get there, and that he could be that kind of act, because I think Jey's just great.
He's great. What I think they probably do with him is, obviously he's not in the title picture right now, but I think he's the kind of a person where, especially if they break him away, he's really got to I mean, unfortunately, as much as it pains me to say, if they really want to go to the next level with him, the Usos tag team needs to go away. Like, he really needs to
It's a shame
be.
because they're such a great team, but
I
I
know,
agree.
but
Yeah,
he needs to
but it's
be
expensive to be
untethered.
Shawn Michaels. Yeah.
He needs to be untethered and really made his own thing. And what I see with him really is, I think they may be thinking this is he's down the road for Roman when Roman is no longer the champ, and
Right,
when
maybe.
so that they could then say, yeah, it would be nice. We'll have a nice bow on the story. Jay actually beats Roman in the end, but we don't have to put the belt on him.
Just a
Like,
personal feud, yeah.
right. That may be where they go with it, because I don't know if they want Jey Uso WWE champion. I don't know. I'm not saying they don't. I just don't think they do. But I think it might be a nice storyline to have him eventually triumph over Roman.
I don't think we're there yet. I don't think you could obviously you can't put the world title on Jay now, but when you kind of look ahead and you think what the trajectory of this is, Sami Zayn gave an interesting interview with Ariel Helwani where they discussed, could you be the guy? And he sort of said, well, I could be the world champion and I can make the talk show appearances and I could wrestle in the main event and all that. But the reality is I can never be that guy, kind of because of how he looks and how he wrestles and sort of like what the character is and the personality and none of it. And I kind of agree with him. And I want to have that discussion a little bit further in a moment. I think Jey Uso could be that guy, because I think Jey Uso does check a lot of the boxes. He's cool, right? I mean, like, I think he's the kind of guy that fans, a lot of the same energy that Roman has is that he's easy to get behind, and I think the role he's been giving in the storyline has just made him so sympathetic and likable, maybe even more than Sami Zayn. And we can, him coming through the crowd on Friday night to be there for his brother, that he's had that loyalty. And again, to me, maybe the best promo in all of WWE. It's Jey Uso. I just think he's been so good, and again, not there yet, but I don't doubt that in 2 years he could be that guy. Let's talk about a Woman of the Year. Bianca Belair takes it with 21% of the vote. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say a no-brainer, but I think a fine choice. Jade Cargill at first runner-up at 14%. Thunder Rosa at 13%. I got to disagree with that one. I don't think Thunder Rosa should even be on this. I mean, I don't think she had that good a year at all.
No,
and
not at all.
Britt Baker at number 9. We could talk about all these, but I do want to talk about some of the people who are interesting that don't show up here. Ronda Rousey's not even like on the radar anymore. And you think about it, she came back early last year, and it was the big return of Ronda Rousey, and she was around really all year. So it wasn't that like, there were these big gaps. But even now, looking to WrestleMania, where you would think it's somewhere where you would lean on her as a name, as a star. Nobody's even really talking about it, and I guess there's talk that she's going to be in a tag team match.
She almost had no reaction when she came back. It was like,
yeah,
nothing.
what a fall for Ronda.
It was a very boring segment, honestly, before and after she got involved in it. I think the role that's best suited to her now, what they could get the most bang for their buck, is something that she just would not agree to do, which is a problem, which is, I think now she could be the credible person that can lose to other people to help build them up, where they could say, whoa, she beat Ronda Rousey. Holy cow. And I just don't think Ronda envisions herself in that role of becoming like the AJ Styles of the women's division, where it's like, wow, you beat who? Like, I don't know if she wants to be that person. And, so this may be like an impasse,
Yeah, and I imagine for she's got to have one of the biggest contracts in WWE. And it just seems like they're not getting their money's worth out of her. And she sort of reminds me of Logan Paul, that you think about that first year of her in the company and what a natural she was right off the bat and really took to it and did great. And I don't know what it is exactly that's missing right now, but it's just not working, hasn't worked all year. I would like to see Liv Morgan in this mix on a runner-up spot, maybe in place of Thunder Rosa. But yeah, what did you want to say?
No, I was going to say, with the Logan Paul and Ronda Rousey comparison, I think, if they're not careful, I know it doesn't seem this way, but it didn't seem that way with Ronda either a number of years ago. I think the same thing could happen with Logan Paul if they're not careful, because the problem is, and it happened with Ronda, and it seems to be very clearly what happened is that she really made an explosive impression, because now in hindsight, it seems like each match she did, it was like so carefully choreographed and orchestrated to perfection. to get the maximum response. And I think that's also what's happening with Logan Paul, where it's like, he's not on the road or anything. He's not like getting out there and getting experience. He's coming in, he's doing one special appearance. They work like hell. They put him in like with Shawn Michaels and all these people to make sure he's perfect. And then he's out. So if that's all it is, if it's smoke and mirrors and they try to like do more with him, he could become another Ronda Rousey. So they might want to like learn from that mistake. You know what I mean? It's just a thought that popped into my head. So he doesn't become the male Ronda Rousey.
Absolutely. Yeah. As far as Bianca, not a lot to say. I think she's great. I think she checks all the boxes. I think she's a great representative for the company. Every time I've had the opportunity to interview her a couple times, and just likable, smart, great spokesperson for the company, incredible in the ring. I mean, she stole WrestleMania 2 years in a row. Everything she does looks great. She's strong. She's charismatic. Again, another one. I don't know what they do with her at WrestleMania. I mean, I expected Ripley to challenge her. I think that would have been a money match.
I know.
Without Ripley, I don't know what you do. I mean, Becky doesn't have a match, but that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to do that. They'd have a great match, but two baby faces. I don't know if that works. Bianca's in a position where she could headline one of those two nights. Because I don't know what the other main event would be. At least right now, it's not super clear. But I also, do you have any expectations what she'll do at WrestleMania?
No. I was like everybody else. I was like everyone else, but we were just assuming, oh, okay, Bianca versus Ripley at WrestleMania. Finally, like, I think that would have been great, and they could have built it up. I mean, I know it comes out of nowhere, but that's where, that's why you have creative writers. I mean, you build it up into something. I think she's great. I think she's an easy pick for this, in my opinion, for this award, because she's a natural baby face. I know some people I love her even on promos, and I know some people say like that's her weakness. I think she comes across very natural. She is not perfect, and I think that doesn't work for everybody. I think it works for her. I'm from that era still of like, to me, a baby face doesn't have to be as on a promo. Babyface should be more real, should be more like, indignant and natural, and not so much playing a part where everything is perfectly slick. And I don't think a babyface needs to be like that. I think she comes across as very real, at warts and all, in terms of like the way, like, to me, a great example is Sasha Banks. I thought she's terrible on promos. I'll say it, just terrible. but part of it, but again, she comes across as very real and natural, but it's just bad. It just doesn't. She just can't sell her emotions. Whereas with Bianca, it's completely I feel it. I love. She's great in the ring. She looks like a wrestler. She's great on the mic as a baby face. I think she's a total package as a woman wrestler. To me,
she's always smiling, and I think that's kind of like a weird thing. And it's one of the challenges that baby faces have. To just be out there looking really happy, and she always does. And I think it's super endearing. I mean, I was there in Tampa when she won her first world title, and her walking to the ring. I mean, she was almost like a fan. I mean, looking around how happy she was, and just smiling ear to ear. And after she won the title, she wouldn't leave. She wanted to spend all night there in the ring, just soaking it in, hugging everybody. Had Montez there and the whole family. And I just thought it was super endearing, super relatable. So I think she's great. You could also, where does it naturally go? The day that you turn her heel, it's going to mean something, because she's so effective as a babyface. So good for her. One last award here, Wrestler of the Year. No surprise, Roman Reigns, 34% wins it. Jon Moxley at 23%. Bianca Belair at 7%, and Cody Rhodes at 6%. I think these are all spot on. I mean, I think this went exactly the right way. And what can you say about Roman? I mean, he had one of the great years in wrestling history. Interesting that early in the year we were sort of worried about, like, well, Roman's hardly wrestling or whatever. How are they going to put on these shows without Roman being there every week? And what it did was make him feel like a bigger deal. When you got Roman, it meant a lot more. And
that's what I said was going to happen. Remember?
and every match he did felt like an event. And beyond that, they were all really good. I mean, the guy's just become is he in the discussion already as a Hall of Fame talent?
No question. I mean, no question in my mind that he's somebody that if he never wrestled again, which God forbid, I don't want that to happen, but if he never wrestled again, he absolutely should go in. If he were to retire, officially announce his retirement tomorrow, I would say put him in the Hall of Fame this year, to me.
Yeah, agreed. I don't know if we'd say that much more. We'll about to talk about him more now. We'll talk some current events, but a clear choice. Real quick, did want to touch on our Stanley Weston awards. And this usually was one award, essentially a Lifetime Achievement Award. I think Kevin has been trying to play catch up with some people that maybe should have gotten this award some time ago. So there are 3 this year. I got no problem with any of them. Manami Toyota, George Napolitano, a legendary photographer for us in wrestling magazines, and Bill Apter. So 2 kind of PWI guys, and then a Japanese wrestling legend. Any thoughts on all of those? Any of those?
No, they're great picks. I think Bill, especially with his ties to the magazine.
I can't believe he never got it. I mean, but
that's long overdue. And I remember
part of it is that he's been part of the family so long. It's like you almost forget, like, oh,
right.
Yeah.
Right. But it's almost like I think some people had your reaction, like, oh, didn't he get that already? And I think, because Stu got it, and I think so it's very appropriate. Bill should get it. And it's interesting. I'm Bill and George are both phenomenal, and they're like, they've been in the business together all this time. They started around the same time. Like there's those 2 guys that you can see at ringside in all these classic matches running around taking pictures. I think it's very fitting that they get it together like that, and as far as Manami Toyota, I mean, you're talking about really Japanese American or whatever, one of the greatest women wrestlers of all time. I mean, just hugely influential, hugely talented, from a category that doesn't get enough of these awards. So I think, applause to Kevin for really kind of thinking in a wider scope in terms of awarding these honors. I think it's great.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was one really long plug for this magazine. Go pick it up, PWI-online.com. Again, just a blast. This kind of thing that you keep on your coffee table for months and months and months and pick it up and devour it little by little, go back to it. So a fun issue. Go check it out. I don't want to take too long here because we've gone almost an hour, already more than an hour, just talking about the issue, which is well-deserved, an important issue. But a lot's happened since we last talked. We've discussed some of it here in the context of the awards. But Royal Rumble came and went. We ostensibly know what the main event of WrestleMania is going to be, Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns. And the other part of it is, at the Royal Rumble, we witnessed what a lot of people, myself, are calling one of the greatest wrestling angles of all time, certainly in our generation, with the fallout or the breaking up of the bloodline and Sami finally standing up to Roman Reigns. Just an incredible, memorable angle, perfect kind of crescendo to this storyline that played out for so many months. What's the last, before we begin this, where is this for you in terms of like all time? I mean, when I saw it, I was thinking mega powers exploding, but even in the last 15, 20 years, there have been a couple that come to mind. Batista and Triple H, right, heading into WrestleMania 21. I think this is better, but that was great. And the one that some people might forget was Shawn Michaels and Chris Jericho, their feud in 2008, which I loved. I thought was just, again, picture perfect. Jericho punching Shawn's wife by accident, but I mean, what that did to make it that much more heated. This might be better than all of those.
This is a category where it's very hard to compare, because I've been having the same debates too, because wrestling being what it is and that it changes so much over the years, like storylines are far more elaborate than they ever used to be. And so it's hard to compare from era to era. Like you mentioned the Mega Powers, and I think the Mega Powers was probably it was the greatest storyline to me of that classic WWF Hulkamania era. It was. But how can you compare it, I mean, to something like the Bloodline? Because it was so much simpler. I don't think it involved as many moving parts. It wasn't something that was like subtly changing on a weekly basis. There were
little things. Remember, Hogan hand slipping.
Yes, there were. But of its era, that one. But in terms of like, I might want to say Austin versus McMahon, only because that was one that I feel like was the first example of of something like the Bloodline, which is a very modern type of storyline where you are trying to fill weekly destination television every single week and doing your best to keep it going and keep it interesting. I think I might say it's been the best since Austin versus McMahon.
So here is the problem, if you want to call it that, and it's a good problem to have, is that they climax with this storyline and Sami standing up to Roman, hitting him with the chair, him getting the beat down. It's the biggest storyline WWE has put on in years, and yet it seems that's not the plan for WrestleMania, right? And some, they're almost a victim of their own good booking that now this incredible storyline that everybody's so hot for, people want to see it, but that's not the plan. And I think it was after a Survivor Series we had the conversation. Is it possible that this could be a WrestleMania main event, Sami and Roman? And now, some months later, not only is it possible, a lot of people argue that is the match, that's what it should be. They've got, again, kind of a good problem. And what's fascinating is that this was the year that it was supposed to be Dwayne Johnson. And the thought was anything short of that is going to be a huge disappointment. And now I think like Dwayne Johnson would be the disappointment, right? I mean, now,
right.
What you've got Sami Zayn, which everybody wants to see. We're seeing it in a week or so now at Elimination Chamber, but it does have the gravitas of a WrestleMania main event, but you also have a very real WrestleMania main event. And what's incredible for me was like they did that storyline at the Royal Rumble, and then Cody wins and is on his way. And I think this is a lot of the sentiment is, well, how are you going to make us excited for Cody and Roman when you've got Sami queued up here and that's so hot? And then they do the angle last week with Cody and Heyman, and you're like, I've got to see this match.
Right. That was one of the best segments in the history of Monday Night Raw.
Right. So now, back to back, you have these like two incredible segments selling big matches. They're both red hot matches. Again, I think a really good problem to have, but what do you do? I'll give my thoughts. I do think WrestleMania should be Cody and Roman Reigns. The other kind of, monkey wrenches, there are 2 nights of WrestleMania. Is there a way to do both?
Well, it reminds me a little bit, not quite, but I got the feeling of, do you remember what happened with WrestleMania 8, where it seemed like the match that people wanted, maybe I'm off base, was Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. Everybody was thinking, oh, this is going to be the Hogan Flair WrestleMania. Oh my God, biggest WrestleMania ever. But Vince already had in his mind from a year earlier, Hogan versus Psycho Sid Vicious, Sid Justice, whatever, and brought him in with a promise that this is going to be a WrestleMania match next year, and he went through with it. Now, there's some similarities where I think Cody was brought in with that understanding. I really do, that this is what we're going to do with you, and this is why you should come here. And so now things have happened which maybe make some fans think twice and say, whoa, maybe we shouldn't go through with this now. Look at all this stuff. But the difference between the current situation, I think, and the WrestleMania 8 situation is I think that going with the original instinct, which is Cody in this case, is still actually the way to go. Like, I think with WrestleMania 8, I think they made a mistake. They should have changed gears. Too bad. Sorry, Sid. You can play softball if you don't like it. Our main event is going to be Hulk Hogan versus Ric Flair. But this time, I think they're doing the right thing. In fact, I pray, I really, really don't even want to say it out loud in case I jinx this, that they don't make it a triple threat.
Yeah, I can't help but think that at least is on the table, right? As
I know it's on the table. It's got to be.
Right.
But
As
don't do it.
And again, going back to 2014 and Daniel Bryan coming up and being red hot, and they had decided already on Batista and Randy Orton, which was so tone deaf at the time. Nobody wanted to see Batista and Randy Orton. And so what did they do? They just threw Daniel Bryan into it, and it worked. They made it into the triple threat, and it worked. But this, the problem is you can have a really good triple threat match. It takes real careful storytelling in that it's got to be a 3-way feud. I think one really effective example years ago was Ronda Becky and Charlotte at WrestleMania, the main event, the first women's main event at WrestleMania, where the feud really was everybody had a problem with everybody else. This doesn't seem that way, right? I mean, they both have a problem with Roman, but what's the story with Cody and Sami? It's not really there. Can you get it there? Can you do something between now and then? Well, I suppose, but it doesn't feel as important. Also, a couple of things to consider is that they're going to do the match with Sami and Roman. It's going to be in Montreal. That crowd's going to be super red hot. It makes this show a lot bigger deal than it would otherwise. And past that, there is a payoff that you could do with Sami at WrestleMania that you could even headline one of the nights, and that is Sami and Kevin against the Usos for the tag title. And that, it's not a world title match, but that absolutely could be a WrestleMania main event. I think it's that big a deal.
Well, two things. The only quibble I have with the Heyman and Cody Rhodes segment, which was, like I said, one of the best promo segments I've ever seen, is it should have happened after Elimination Chamber. Because I think that it sort of Cody did his best, and I thought he was brilliant to say, good luck, Sami Zayn, and I could be wrestling Sami Zayn, and that's important. But you're basically just telegraphing it like it's going to be Cody and Roman at WrestleMania. You
can't not do that. That's right.
You've telegraphed, right? How could they not deliver it? So I feel like maybe they should have held off on do it after, where it's like full speed ahead. But the other thing is, so I think they're aware of that, and I think what they're trying to do, I think the Roman Sami match is really going to be just used as a stepping stone to build heat between Usos and Sami and Kevin Owens. I think what they're trying to do, and I think it even started at the Rumble, is they're trying to shift the heat and shift the direction so that the beef becomes less between directly Roman and Sami, but between Sami and Jay, that becomes more of the beef, that like now we think Jay is on Sami's side. He's willing to reject his family. We got the fist bump last week, and then he turns on him. You know what I mean? And then it becomes like, no, I am going to go with my family over you. And then the heat is kind of shifted where that takes care of Sami. Now Sami's got something to do. And in my opinion, it does not feel like a cop-out because you have the added level of the friendship of Sami and Kevin coming back together, coming through the fire, and now they're friends and they're tighter than they've ever been. So I think there's enough there where personally, a lot of fans might not agree, but I think it makes up for the fact that the storyline is not Sami conquers all and beats Roman and becomes the world champion. I don't think that needs to happen.
I 100% agree. And I think, the payoff there of the Usos with this historic tag title reign going for whatever it is, 2 years, longest title reign ever. The move here would be to have Zayn and Owens beat them for the tag championship at WrestleMania, and the place will become absolutely unglued. And that visual of Kevin and Sami, as you touched on, I mean, this, maybe the longest storyline in wrestling history. I mean, you going back to the Ring of Honor days and before that. I mean, these two guys came together in the Montreal independent scene. Now that payoff, winning the tag championship at WrestleMania again, in what I think could absolutely be the main event of night one of WrestleMania. It's that big a match.
Totally. And it probably will be. I think it probably will be.
Yeah, and I think it's a fine attraction, and I think it would be satisfying to fans. And going back to what I talked about before about, can Sami be the guy? And that's another thing you have to think about with WrestleMania. Beyond the match you deliver on that night is where do you go from here? Cody, if he wins that title, and I wouldn't say it's for sure. I think he'd be the betting favorite, right? I mean, I'd put it at 60-40, 75-25 that Cody leaves WrestleMania with the world title. But the point is, as we touched on, Gunther, Seth Rollins, there's loads of ways, Cody can be that guy. He can carry the company. He is a proven ratings draw. He's a proven a box office draw. Does he ultimately sputter out, flame out? We'll see. But he's worth taking that risk with and investing in. because they can use another top guy, and he's that guy. Sami, as great as he's been in this storyline, I gotta say, I just don't see him as that guy. I think he's the perfect guy for this role. But really, carry this out to its conclusion. So Sami beats Roman Reigns for the world title, and maybe they run it back and have some rematches, whatever and then what? Sami Zayn is your defending world champion. It just doesn't work. He's not that guy.
He's more in the Mick Foley mold, I would say.
Yes, yeah. And it's not a slight on him. It's just it's not what he brings to the table. And as great as he is, I do think that it might be. I think he's been really good in an excellent storyline, right? I don't think he's the MVP of the storyline. I think he's played his role fine, but if this is an ensemble cast, the Bloodline is nominated for Best Picture and should win Best Picture. Sami Zayn does not win Best Actor for his role in it, And again, I'd argue that maybe Jey Uso does. But again, I think people are super hot over something, rightfully so. The best storyline WWE has told in a long, long time, but maybe that losing some perspective about how you really play this out. I just don't see Sami Zayn beating Roman Reigns and being the defending world champion at WrestleMania. It just doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. But all these pieces somewhat being in their place now. How are you feeling about WrestleMania?
I feel very good about it. I think, and not just because I have every single match in my head how it's going to work out, but because I feel there's enough momentum. They have enough potential matches. They have enough people who are over. The company seems to be on a hot streak that I think they're going to put on a hell of a show. Like they're on a roll right now. I was having this debate with somebody, and I think it's really valid. TV ratings and even live attendance, but especially TV, it's not the most reliable metric anymore. Like people could say, well, they're not even getting 2 million people watching Raw, but I think that's almost a very outdated metric. And I really feel like, given the momentum they have and the numbers they are doing and the direction it's going in, which is up, that if this was the era where, people were watching TV more, let's say, whatever you want to say, 20 years ago, whatever it was, 15 years ago, I think they'd be doing, their ratings would be currently twice as high as they are now, if not more. I think you'd be talking about 3s and 4s every week. It would be that kind of a thing. And it just goes to show that TV on the whole is weak right now, but especially even when you look at all the numbers, WWE's numbers are among the highest, especially in key demographics on TV compared to a lot of other TV, which is going down the drain. I mean, most TV that's watched today is like CNN and Fox News, and they're just still killing it in a shrinking marketplace. So I think they're on a roll, and I think WrestleMania is going to be a very, very solid show, 2 nights.
Yeah, I think, again, the ultimate sort of like telling thing of this is that for the better part of the last year, I think this was the year that everybody assumed it was going to be The Rock and Roman Reigns, and it's the biggest match in wrestling. And I think if they went and they announced today that The Rock's agreed and we're going to shift everything and this is going to be the match, I think fans would be disappointed. Like, really, we got to see The Rock and Roman Reigns? I mean, I think that's how hot people are for these other storylines, whether it's Sami or Cody. So, they're doing something right. So anyhow, fun discussion. Brian, anything you want to plug before we get out of here?
Just my own podcast, I guess. I've been having a lot of fun with it lately. I just passed a full year. It's called Shut Up and Wrestle. We had our most recent episode, where I brought Keith Elliott Greenberg on to remember Lanny Poffo, which, actually by the time this comes out, it may not be the most recent episode, but it's one I think people should check out. It was really, I thought, heartfelt, and I was glad that Keith made time to do it. But the show's called Shut Up and Wrestle, and people can find it wherever they find their podcasts, including where they find our show.
Real quick, what is Lanny Poffo's a lasting legacy? I guess we should say something about that here. I've said, when I heard the unfortunate news of his passing, a guy who came around maybe 10 years too early, because you think of him with that skill set in the cruiserweight scene in WCW just 10 years later,
Yeah.
How much more of an impact he could have made. And I think he actually was employed by WCW during that time, but
He was.
literally never wrestled. I mean, I don't ever remember seeing
He
him
was.
on
I think
television.
he did a house show or something.
Yeah.
He was way ahead of his time. He was doing moonsaults, standing moonsaults, like at a time when I think
Again, not to interrupt you, but what's fascinating about that is that when he would do that stuff, he'd sort of be mocked by wrestling announcers, whether it was a Gorilla Monsoon or everybody's like,
right.
oh, why would you break that out in the middle of a fight? And again, ahead of his
Right.
time.
Well, that was almost when we talked about that in the show with Keith, where like that was almost part of his gimmick of being like this kind of silly, fancy pants kind of a guy, like, overdoing things and just being too precious in his wrestling style. Like that's how it was looked at then. But I think what he did and what his legacy, what he did that was great is since he came along in a time where just doing that wasn't enough. He leaned into the character work, and no matter what you say about him, and he wasn't the main event star or whatever, he definitely wasn't the star that Randy was, fine, but he was memorable. Nobody forgot him. Everybody remembers who was watching anyway, Leaping Lanny Poffo. Everybody remembers the Genius. Everybody remembers that he beat Hulk Hogan on Saturday night's main event by countout. That's like a big moment. And it was because he was so good at what he did. He was a natural. He wasn't bitter about it. He wasn't one of these guys going, looking at his brother and wishing he could be like that. And Keith confirms it in the show. He did not feel that way. He was happy with the hand he got dealt. He took what was given to him and he made the absolute most of it. And I think that's his legacy.
And I think another important part of his legacy is Macho Man's brother. And you'd think that that would be maybe a bad thing, living in the shadow. But we should all be, lucky enough to have a brother like that, because the love from Lanny for Randy and the advocacy was unending. And it was so clear that he truly, truly loved his brother and protected that legacy fiercely. And just super honorable. And you said never came off as a guy who felt like he was left in the shadows or anything like that. I think he recognized that his brother was a one-of-a-kind talent, one of the biggest stars of his era, one of the best wrestlers of his era, and wanted to protect that and pay tribute to it. And again, I just a character, a strange guy. I mean, I've talked to him too, and he is that guy. He was the guy you'd see on television.
He was the Genius. I mean, to a certain degree, yeah.
So
the Genius was Lanny Poffo with the volume turned up. But I mean, he was. That was part of the things, and I'll just say that too. That made it sad is that he was this torch bearer of the Poffo family legacy. He was keeping the name alive. He was keeping Randy's legacy alive. He helped get him into the Hall of Fame. He probably wouldn't have gone in, definitely wouldn't have without him. And, now it's truly the end of an era of the Poffo family.
Yeah, you think about Randy and Angelo, their mother, even Liz.
Elizabeth, sure, yes. All of that.
Yeah, a real shame, yeah. Anyway, our condolences certainly to the Poffo family on the loss of Lanny. All right, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back soon.